Ibrahim Traore is a symbol, and a symbol is part of the system. So what young people must realize that success is not an individual achievement. You achieve because you are part of a team. The situation in Burkina Faso must be understood in the context of history. And that history, in my view, starts from 1983 with the emergence of Thomas Sankara. When Thomas Sankara took power in what was then Upper Volta, he changed the name of the country to Burkina Faso, the land of the upright men. That was seen as a revolution, and many things happened under the leadership of Thomas Sankara, until he was eliminated in 1987. We now know that one of the people who participated was a close compatriot who became the President Blaise Compaoré, and that is in the public domain. That short stint was so dramatic in the lives of the people of Burkina Faso and in Africa that Thomas Sankara became an icon. And the rise of Ibrahim Traore is almost seen as a reincarnation of Thomas Sankara and his revolutionary fervor. And that is why he has become a poster boy for the new Africa. But let us understand how it came about. In the year 2022, in the month of January, the government of Roch Marc Christian Kabore was overthrown in January. And part of the accusation against the Kabore administration was that they had failed to eliminate the Islamic insurgency in the northern part of Burkina Faso. But Kabore did not stay in power for too long. In the month of September, in fact, in the month of September, the administration that had overthrown Kabore in January, that was the administration of Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. That is the administration that overthrew Kabore. He himself was to be overthrown in the month of September, the year 2022, by Ibrahim Traore and his colleagues. And the reason why I think Traore then very quickly became the poster boy was because of the decisions that he made to sever ties with France. His language was that we had remained a neo-colonial state for too long. Re-echoing what Thomas Sankara had said, his language was that we must have our own resources. If it is our uranium, let us use our uranium. If it is feeding ourselves, let us engage in agriculture that is going to feed our people. Let us ensure that we, the Burkinabe, are doing things that are in the interest of the Burkinabe and therefore in the larger interest of the continent of Africa. And it also came at a time when there is general disillusionment with the ballot. Africans had been persuaded, particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, that this thing called democracy as defined by the West was the alpha and omega of good governance. You had to have multi-party politics, you had to have periodic elections, and people went to the ballot. In many cases, the ballot was not very useful because the vote was stolen. And if it was not stolen, the people who emerged from the ballot did not do anything for the people. So the people wanted drama, the people wanted change, the people wanted sound rhetoric, the people wanted Pan-African rhetoric. And in many ways, Ibrahim Traore, as it stands now, represents that. But remember, his administration has only been in power for 3 years. In the life of a nation, that is a very short time. And one may say the beginning is good, but the journey is still long. Once again, when one continues that conversation, I want us to remember that in the year 2014, in Malabo, in Equatorial Guinea, African heads of states and government came up with the Malabo Protocol that outlawed unconstitutional changes of power. And in that context, unconstitutional changes of power had to be defined, and they were defined under the Malabo Declaration of the year 2022, where the African heads of state not only reiterated what had been said in 2014, but also formed the African Court on Human and People's Rights and said unconstitutional change of power means this: acquiring power by a coup d'etat, 2, refusing to hand over power when you have lost an election, and 3, tampering with constitutional processes to extend one's life in office. So to the outside world, to your typical African leader, including the African Union, the rise to power of Ibrahim Traore is seen as unconstitutional change of power and rise to power. And that is why Burkina Faso, alongside Niger and Mali, have been suspended from the activities of the African Union. Why then are the people of Africa celebrating those who have acquired power in what other African leaders are calling unconstitutional change of power? Why is it that people who are described by the Western media and by African media as leading military juntas have become so unpopular? The reason is not far to seek. They have seen the so-called democratically elected leaders in different parts of Africa. They are corrupt. Some of them are murderous. And some of them are plain anti-people because they don't do that which is in the interest of the people. The people of Africa have seen how people who are in power retain and extend their stay in power for unnecessarily long when they are delivering nothing. And Ibrahim Traore's administration presents a hope, presents in the view of particularly young Africans a light at the end of the tunnel. And what is that light saying? That light is saying, and it can be heard through the echo chambers, saying, you the colonizers, you the French, who in 1958 pretended to hand over political power, we no longer want to be with you. We no longer want to be your latter-day slaves. Traore is being heard as saying that. Traore is being heard as saying, you the neo-colonizers who have given us the short hand of the stick, you reap where you have not sown. You take our uranium, you take our resources, you take our minerals, and you give us a pittance. You are not going to do it anymore. You, the colonizers who handed over to us systems of governance that cannot work, including electoral commissions, including printing ballots in your own countries, including printing paper currency in your own countries, we will not allow you. He is saying that. You, the colonizers who, when we want to liberate ourselves, you create insurgency, you sow seeds of discord within our ranks, we are not going to allow you to do that. You, the African Union, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you ECOWAS, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you too appear to be mere lapdogs of the international order, particularly the West. To the extent that he is saying that, he is striking the right chords of a dissatisfied, disillusioned people in the continent of Africa, and their wish and desire is that there is a new dawn. A new dawn where governance will be different. A new dawn where governance will be people-centered. A new dawn where the umbilical cord between the colonizer and the free peoples will be severed. That is what, in the minds of many, Ibrahim Traore represents, and that is his appeal. Remember, throughout history, people, and this is human, always want symbols of what they are fighting about. In the struggle for independence, if you look at other nations, in Ghana it was Nkrumah, Tanzania it was Nyerere, in Zambia it was Kaunda, in Malawi it was Banda, in Mozambique it was Machel, Angola it was Neto. But this is now big because Traore has come at a time when there is what I call African Renaissance, and people want things that are pan-African to defy what happened in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. That is what is happening. He is that symbol. You know, in history, people emerge, or leadership emerges that is defined by environment. Upper Volta had been one of the French colonies that was seen to be wedded to the Paris government, almost in the class of La Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal at one time. When Thomas Sankara came and said, we've got to recognize ourselves, and started by changing the name of the country, that was unprecedented. It was only in Ghana that Nkrumah had changed the name of Gold Coast to Ghana. This was new, this was fresh. And Thomas Sankara then was seen in that mold. A servant leader who says, I do not want the trappings of power. I do not want long motorcades. I do not want security that is a mere display of power. I want to serve the people. I don't want to ride in Mercedes-Benz or Bentley or Cadillac. I want something that is functional, something that moves. And when Thomas Sankara appears in 1987 at the OAU meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and calls for our refusal to pay debts, he created a revolutionary fervor in Burkina Faso. And Traore is in that tradition. He was young then, but the stories must have been told to him of Thomas Sankara. And remember, they come out of the same environment, the military environment. They may have been trained after the style of the French, but sometimes you've got to swim in the oceans of the enemy in order to know who they are. So he grew in that environment, and when therefore he comes and says, we are leading, when he comes and says, we are not going to have the trappings of power to prevent us from working for the people, when he comes and says, my salary is not going to be increased, when he comes and says, I'm not going to be summoned to appear in European capitals, when he comes and says that the IMF and the World Bank are not going to dictate to us what to do, when he comes and says that the mineral companies of the West are not going to tell us what to do, we are going to choose our own friends in the international arena, he is speaking for many people in the continent of Africa. And that is why, for the moment, he remains in the minds and hearts of many people. And the prayer of many is that he does not change. because power has its own way of changing and corrupting people. The prayer of many who are watching him is that he remains on course, that he remains faithful to the agenda, that he remains faithful to his declared position that he is a people's servant, that he is a midwife to deliver for the people of Burkina Faso and to ensure that the quality of their lives is improved. For the moment, he is receiving the best judgment that a leader can expect. He can do no wrong in the minds of many. And the media and social media is populated with a lot of artificial intelligence things which are attributed to him. And they are all positive. That is a statement of the hunger that Africans have for positive messaging. It gives hope. It tells them that it can be done and that it must be done. So in the same way, for those who read the Bible, as Moses stood before his people and said, I'm going to part the Red Seas, Traore is expected to part Red Seas, almost to summon manna from heaven, almost to cause pillars of fire to stand between them and the neo-colonizers. The expectations are great. The situation as it is in the Sahel region must be understood at two levels. Level number one is that it has brought forth a new generation of leaders. And remember, it started in the year 2021 with the coup d'etat in Mali, when Atimi Goita overthrew the administration of Now. When he did that, the rebellion started, and immediately after that, there was the Burkina Faso coup in 2022, and immediately after that, in 2023, there was the coup in Niger. And immediately after that, you saw that they were expelled, and the three countries have moved out of the economic community of West African states and created their own one in the Sahel. And remember that that region is also infested by insurgencies who we think are also manufactured by the former colonizer France. Remember that that region has said we are having one currency. Remember they've said that we are allowing free movement of people. Remember that they are removing tariff and non-tariff barriers. Remember that the French have also ensured that their kin and kith in the West are hostile to those administrations, and of course by extension hostile to Burkina Faso. Remember that they were exploiting the uranium. Remember they were exploiting their minerals. Remember that they saw these as satellite states, and it is for that reason why Russia became attractive as a trusted ally. And many in the West sometimes don't understand why Russia is attractive as an alternative to the Western countries. The history is long, but let us cut it short. Russia was not a colonizer. Despite attempts by some Western historians to say that they attempted to colonize in Africa, they did not. So there is no colony of Russia. And even when the Soviet Union existed prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, and we use the word Russia as if it was the same as the Soviet Union. At least that is what happened in many parts of Africa. And what did they do? They were seen in the early days to be positive supporters of African initiatives. In Egypt, during the administration of Gamal Abdel Nasser, when the West had refused to build the Aswan High Dam, it is the Russians who came. In Ghana, the Russians were friendly to Kwame Nkrumah, of course, then a Soviet Union. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, when the UN had refused and or failed to come in aid of Patrice Emery Lumumba, it is the Russians who are called, and then Lumumba was called a communist. So the Russians were also present in Angola to support NATO. They were present in Mozambique to support Mondlane and Machel. They were present in Zimbabwe to support Nkomo and Mugabe. They were present to support the African National Congress in South Africa. Their presence in Africa has been seen as positive, and they have been seen as a friend who does not want to humiliate and dominate. They may have their interest in having minerals, they may have their interest, as indeed every country does, but they are people you can call friends, not fair weather friends. And it is in that context that then they become a natural choice for two reasons. One, historical. Secondly, because they have the military wherewithal. Remember that this world is the law of the jungle. And if you have a friend who is feared by your enemy, then that does guarantee your security. And it's that context, therefore, that you see Russia have become in many ways the protectors of this administration at the request of the administration. Because if it were not so, history tells us that you can be eliminated. And we have had many rumors of attempts at the life of Ibrahim Traore. And these colonizers, they don't do so directly. They use your very own. They create fifth columnists within your very own system. And if you had any doubt, how did they eliminate Thomas Noel Sankara? Through the people that he thought were his friends. In Kiswahili we say, kikulacho kingoni mwako. That which bites you is inside the clothes that you wear. And that is why you need friends who will stand by you, come rain or shine.